Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual town hall or this virtual impeachment event. Welcome. My name is Brandon Upton, and I have the privilege and honor of working with Tom Steyer as an organizing manager for the Need to Impeach campaign. I also have the honor of being from the great state of South Carolina, and I will be your host for this Impeach-in teach-in tonight. But first, I want to give a bit of housekeeping first. During this call, all participants will be muted. If you have any questions at any point, just press *3. At that point, you'll be placed in our questioning queue for an opportunity to ask your question during our Q&A session. Now, we're expecting 1,000 plus participants tonight for tonight's call, so we would love to get to as many questions as possible. So in order to do that, we just need a little help from you. Make sure your question is at 20 seconds or less, because we really would like to get to a lot of folks tonight. Now, as many of you may know, we've taken a page out of the Civil Rights Playbook, and we are hosting teach-ins all across this country. We call them impeach-ins because we know this one thing. Education is the best tool we have in the fight to protect our democracy against Donald J. Trump. We've learned that when people are educated about the impeachment process and what's really in the Mueller report, they join our movement. So tonight we're all in for a major treat. Not only are we going to learn what's in the Mueller report and about the impeachment process, but we're learning this with our founder, Mr. Tom Steyer. Also, we'll be joined by filmmaker, actor, producer, and activist, Mr. Rob Reiner. So excited about that. Also, we'll be joined by the Senior Vice President for Social Justice from the New School, uh, Miss Maya Wiley. And also, we'll be joined by CNN legal analyst, Renato Mariotti. So, they will all share facts about the impeachment process and the facts about what's in the Mueller report. But again, if you have any questions at any time, press *3 so that you can enter the queue and have your questions, potentially have your questions answered during this call. But now we're going to get started and we're going to hear from our founder, Mr. Tom Steyer. Tom, you have the floor.
Thanks, Brandon. And hello, everybody. I'm in San Francisco, and I wanted to thank you at the outset for your commitment and for the work that you've already done. I also did want to start by thanking our special guests tonight, Rob Reiner, Maya Wiley, and Renato Mariotti. They are not just smart, but they have specialized insights about where we stand now and where we can go from here. What I was going to do was just do a little recap of where we've come from. Because we started this, believe it or not, over a year and a half ago in October of 2017. And we knew when we started Need to Impeach that it was not going to be broadly accepted, that we were early, but we thought very strongly that the evidence was clear that this president met the criteria to be impeached and that it was urgent to get him out. And we felt that every single subsequent day, that evidence and that urgency would be clearer. I will say that within a week, we had 1 million supporters, like the people on this phone. Today, we're about 8,200,000 people who've signed the list. And I think that it's very clear at this point across the country in terms of both political parties that actually we've won the argument. That in effect, what we originally stated was that this president has met the criteria to be impeached and it's urgent to get him out of office. I think that argument is pretty much over. There's still a big fight ahead of us. But the idea about whether we were right or wrong 18 months ago is pretty much done. And I want to also call out for the people on the phone that in the election of 2018, the people on our list, which at that point was over 6 million people, turned out, and we can tell this from the voter file, at more than an 80% level. So that in terms of the victory that took place for Democrats to flip the House and to basically put a serious check on Mr. Trump's administration, the people on the list and the people on this phone participated in a very dramatic way in terms of turnout and also in terms of participation, including sending more than 1.6 million postcards to other people on the list, encouraging them to vote. Having said that, we did our part in 2018. The people on this list continue to participate at an extraordinary level. We have sent more than 1 million messages to Congress this year. We've sent almost 100,000 phone calls. We've had over 300 visits directly with members. And what we can see is that this year there has been an increasing momentum. And let me give you some numbers about it. Because the theory has been that we're somehow a fringe element. And that is very, very far from true. Actually, a Fox poll from last week said that that 50% of Americans now want an impeachment inquiry to start. And that doesn't mean 50% are against. It means that 50% are affirmatively for it. And we can see this working through the members of Congress. Our last number on people who would publicly go against Democratic congressional leadership and call for impeachment or impeachment inquiry is 82. Just so you know, there are 239 Democratic Congresspeople. 82 of them have publicly broken with leadership. We think the private number is much, much higher. 12 of them have done that in the last week. The majority of the Democrats running for president have already come out for impeachment or an impeachment inquiry. So where we think we are is we have had dramatic momentum this year and particularly in the last month or two since the Mueller report came out. And that's why we're doing these impeach-ins, and why we're trying to make sure that the movement keeps growing and that we continue to put pressure on our representatives to do the right thing. Because what our research shows, and this is extremely clear, is that whether you voted for Trump or you didn't vote for Trump, when Americans get the information about what he's done, they all have the same response. Firstly, they say, we didn't know that. Even if they're Trump voters, they say, we didn't know that. He's a liar and a cheat. If I did that, I'd go to jail. And then their answers about what to do about it, not every single person says. The majority of people say, let's impeach him and get him out of office as fast as possible. But not everybody goes there. But everybody says the first three things. It's overwhelming. So we have stood up and made it possible for Democrats to control the Congress. We've delivered them the ability to act. And we're asking them to use that power now to do what they know is right. And so if you look back to the last time this situation occurred, which was a long time ago with President Nixon in 1974, what really happened was fewer than 30% of Americans wanted him impeached and removed before the hearings. And by the time they'd had the Watergate hearings, that was up to 57%. At that point, the American people were saying to their elected representatives, Democrats and Republicans, do the right thing. Remove him from office, or we'll remove you from office. And that's kind of where we are. We've won the argument, and you can tell by reading a summary of the op-eds around the country, editorials, what people say on TV, that there's no longer an argument that this president hasn't broken the law and isn't unfit for office and isn't dangerous. The question right now is to decide what to do about it. And that's where we are, and that's how far we've come, and that's what we have to get done. So that's what we're here to talk about today, about how to take it to the next step. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Brandon.
Thank you so much, Tom. Um, Now, at this point, we're going to hear from Mr. Rob Reiner. Like I say, filmmaker, actor, producer, and activist. And I've literally watched his latest Now This videos maybe 5 or 10,000 times. Mr. Reiner, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. And first, I want to thank Tom for his leadership. I mean, he's been way out in front of this before anybody else. He was able to recognize the obvious and was able to, put his money where his mouth is and walk the walk and all those things, and got out there and did, he softened up the ground, and now it's up to all of us to make sure that we make good on what he set out to do. Just to hit on a couple of things that Tom brought up. First of all, the Mueller report, hasn't been read by not only people around the country, but it hasn't been read by even members of Congress. So the point is, once you read it, it's impossible not to go down the road of impeachment, because it contains more damning evidence of criminality of any president in the history of the country. So it's all there, and it's there to be, to be the roadmap for articles of impeachment. Now, Tom brought up the idea that, we worked very hard to flip the House in 2018, and one of the reasons one of the messages we had was that we would now have subpoena power, and that subpoena power would be used to hold this lawless president accountable. And so far, we've seen this president essentially commit an impeachable offense every day by his inability to play by the rule of law, his blocking witnesses from testifying, blocking documents from being turned over to congressional oversight, and he's willing to go to the mat to stop an honest investigation from going forward. So I just want to bring up a couple of things that's really important. One is, we're in kind of a catch-22 right now. I've had two very long conversations with Speaker Pelosi in the last couple of weeks, and she keeps talking about wanting to see enough support throughout the country in order to, to start impeachment inquiries. Now, Tom pointed out the fact that we're at 50% in the country, but that 50% represents a greater percentage than what we see with our members of Congress. The fact of the matter is that if we were to start impeachment inquiry, and we're far, far beyond where Nixon was at this time, and I think it was even lower, Tom. I think it was at 19% before they started the Senate bipartisan hearings. If we're able to start impeachment inquiry, we would be able to, and I listened to you, Renato, who's coming up in your conversation with Lawrence Tribe, and I've talked with Professor Tribe quite a bit, and he makes it very clear that if we're able to start a formal impeachment inquiry, that gives us the leverage of being an official judicial proceeding, and it can, make the process go much quicker in terms of the courts ruling on either evidence, documentary evidence, or compelling witnesses to testify. So that's what needs to happen, because, like I say, it's catch-22. We can't get Nancy to pull the trigger on this unless we have enough support, and we're not going to get the support unless we have actual witnesses coming on camera and under oath in public. Now, we're hearing today that Robert Mueller, they're working very hard to get him to testify. But I would submit that, time is running out here. We don't have months and months and months. If this thing slips past summer and into the fall, we're going to be very close to the first caucus and primaries, and then it becomes much more difficult. But I got to say one thing: this is not about a political calculation, and I believe that that's what Nancy Pelosi is doing. She's making a political calculation, and this has to be so far beyond that. This is about protecting democracy, and if this president can't be impeached, then no president will ever be impeached, because, like I say, there's more criminality on this guy. And by the way, if we're able to start a real honest hearing and we're able to consolidate, so it's not just, it's not 6 committees looking at him. We can look at his financial stuff. We can look at his campaign finance violations. We can look at the emoluments clause, and that can all be done as part of an impeachment inquiry. And it doesn't have to just be the Judiciary Committee or the Senate or the House Intelligence Committee or Oversight. It can be one committee like they did with Watergate. So that's what I'm hoping for, that we've got to get him to get off the dime. We've got to get Nancy Pelosi to get off the dime and actually pull the trigger on this, because once that happens, I'm convinced that when people hear what's really in that Mueller report, and when they hear what he's really done in terms of his businesses and how he's used the presidency to enrich himself, it's going to be very clear that this man needs to leave office. And I think, from a purely political standpoint, this is to our benefit as Democrats, because I think it's going to help us in the 2020 election, not hurt us. So that's my pitch. And, I've made a couple of videos. There's a new one out today, and I'm going to make some more. I'm going to keep pounding on this. But the trick is to get Nancy Pelosi to pull the trigger on that. And the only way that's going to happen is to pressure our representatives to start coming out in public in favor of an inquiry. But that's all I have to say. And again, Tom, thank you so much for leading the charge. And who's next to talk?
Thanks, Rob.
Go ahead, Tom.
So I just wanted to make sure that we all thanked Rob for participating and for all the work that he's doing, not just tonight, but, in the months behind and the months ahead.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mr. Reiner. And the work that you're doing, it just means so much, because what we've found is when people learn about what's in the Mueller report, they join our movement. But we all know that there are tons of Americans who haven't read the Mueller report. So it's important for us to get to know and share that information with the public. That's why I'm so excited to have Ms. Maya Wiley on here, the Senior Vice President of Social Justice at the New School. Ms. Wiley, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to Mr. Steyer, thank you to Rob Reiner, and thank you to all of you who are listening to this call, because I think fundamentally this is about our democracy and democratic practice. And in that context, I am going to try to summarize 448 pages in about 3 minutes. So consider this speed dating. Let me just start with volume 2, which is obstruction, and work my way backwards to volume 1, which is conspiracy with Russia. And I think you'll see why I'm doing that in a moment. First, let's start with obstruction is a crime against justice. Obstruction is about interfering with the orderly administration of justice. And that obviously includes an investigation in the context of the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, and also congressional investigations. So if we really summarize, the bottom line is Robert Mueller's team found 10 categories of evidence of obstruction, which is really a whole series of incidents that point to obstruction. I'm going to summarize it in about 5, but just to say that what Robert Mueller made very clear is, I am not even evaluating this as a prosecutor, meaning he said literally, I am not making a prosecutorial judgment, but that's because I'm not allowed to. As an operative within the Department of Justice, I am bound by its rules, its procedures, and its guidance, which includes that you cannot indict a sitting president. This is not about whether we agree with that. This is about him being clear. And that's important because over 1,000 prosecutors have said, under the following 10 categories that I'm going to speed summarize into 5, that if that was not a sitting president, they would prosecute it as a crime. So the first category is Flynn lied, right? Michael Flynn on the transition team lied to the FBI about interacting with Russian Ambassador Kislyak during the transition. But the reason it becomes part of the obstruction story is because, one, Trump says, according to Robert Mueller's team, he thought when he fired Flynn, it would end the quote-unquote Russia thing. He told Chris Christie this. He directed K.T. McFarlane, his national security advisor, to essentially send a false email denying that Donald Trump had instructed Michael Flynn to actually have a discussion about Russia sanctions with the then Russian ambassador Kislyak. And then, of course, there is his conversation with James Comey, who he asked to drop it when it came to Flynn. Okay, that's the summary of 1. Number 2, Jeff Sessions. Okay, the man who was the attorney general that Donald Trump himself appointed, the first senator to support Donald Trump's candidacy for presidency, carried out every single policy directive that Donald Trump asked him to, except that he recused himself under the rules that were quite crystal clear of the Department of Justice because he was a witness in the special counsel's investigation. He had actually been in some of those rooms, in some of the conversations in the campaign related to Russia, and he had also had meetings with Ambassador Kislyak. So he recuses himself as he must, and Donald Trump spends several different incidents in the report of pressuring Sessions to reverse the recusal, blaming Sessions when James Comey testifies before Congress and says, oh, yeah, I won't sit up here and tell you today that Trump is not a target, and says explicitly, your job is to protect me, which is decidedly not the job of the U.S. Attorney General. 3, Comey fired. All right, I won't say a lot more about that because I'm assuming most of you have followed those facts. Okay, and then we have Trump trying to fire Mueller and directing people to lie. I've, admittedly conflated a few categories there, but let's be clear that he literally goes to people like Don McGahn, his White House counsel, and says, go tell Rod Rosenstein that essentially Robert Mueller has a conflict, which he doesn't actually have, and then tell Rosenstein to remove him. And then he starts pressuring McGahn repeatedly, saying things like, you got to do this, call Rod. And he's at the same time giving all these public statements, calling it a witch hunt, undermining the investigation, asking intelligence officials like Dan Coates to help him stop the investigation, and asking people like K.T. McFarlane to deny they asked Flynn, to actually reach out to Ambassador Kislyak, asking McGahn to create a false statement, essentially denying that he was asked by Trump to get Comey fired. And of course, there's Hope Hicks, who he asked to not allow disclosure of the Don Jr. emails, where he's excitedly trying to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. Okay, that's volume 2 in a nutshell. It's only a nut. It's a very big shell. If we go to volume 1, one of the things that we've heard repeatedly is, oh, no, there was no collusion. Well, first of all, Robert Mueller said very clearly, there is no legal concept of collusion. We are not talking about collusion. we're talking about conspiracy, and he says clearly, we could not find evidence to establish conspiracy. And he then goes on to say things like witnesses lied, witnesses were unavailable because they were in foreign countries and we couldn't get to them. And then he says witnesses destroyed either had encrypted evidence that was destroyed, and makes very clear that even that, he's not finding exoneration, but he's also not saying that he has evidence to establish conspiracy. And one thing I want to separate out here, which gets confused in the media discussion of these issues, is what he clearly says in the report is when it comes to the Internet Research Agency, those are the Russian hackers working for the Russian intelligence service, hacked the DNC emails, somehow WikiLeaks gets them, they become public. What he says is it's clear that they were hiding their Russian identity from Donald Trump's campaign. That is explicit and stated, and we should acknowledge that. But in addition, he says that there are 272 contacts between Trump and Trump's team and Russian-linked operatives, and some of those contacts, they're absolutely known to be Russian operatives. And this includes the Trump Tower meeting, the infamous Trump Tower meeting with Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner and Don Jr., where they're excitedly trying to get emails that on Hillary Clinton. There's also, of course, George Papadopoulos, who's actively seeking dirt on Hillary Clinton, and in a meeting with Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions says he made that clear, and folks nodded around him getting it. Many, many more facts around this. Paul Manafort sharing polling data with Konstantin Kilimnik, who is literally one of the people who's indicted by Robert Mueller. That kind of chain of evidence not fully fleshed out for a bunch of reasons. But what it all comes down to, and we won't even talk about Roger Stone, who's going to trial around trying to get those WikiLeaks emails, lots of facts about Trump appearing to make very interestingly timed public statements about emails coming while Roger Stone is having communications about getting emails. So what's very clear in the Volume 1 picture is, number one, why are you lying, as is outlined in Volume 2, and so deeply concerned as an outline in Volume 2, if you got nothing to worry about around what's in Volume 1? And that's why they should be read together. And in Volume 1, Congress has an extremely legitimate and important set of questions around how compromised are these folks in the White House, and the degree to which there's potential corruption in hiding the Trump Tower Moscow deal, or other issues related to emoluments. So whether or not it falls in the category of conspiracy with Russia, it certainly falls into serious questions about campaign finance violations, and essentially whether or not we have a White House that is compromised by interests that are not the interests of the American people. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much for that explanation. So many of us not only aren't fully up to speed with what's in the Mueller report, but also about the process of impeachment. So we'll be getting into that next. But before I get Mr. Mariotti on the floor here, I want to remind folks that if you have any questions, just press *3 so that you can enter your question into the queue. Again, you can press *3 at any time and have your question added to the queue. At this point, I would like to welcome Mr. Renato Mariotti. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. So, I was a former federal prosecutor and, as he mentioned, a CNN legal analyst and other things. One thing that Rob mentioned earlier is that on my podcast, On Topic, I have Professor Lawrence Tribe on. And the reason I spent a lot of time talking to Professor Tribe is because he has been influencing, I'd say, a lot of the members who've been moving into the camp of opening an impeachment inquiry. And a lot of you are wondering, okay, I keep hearing this word impeachment inquiry. What does that mean? How is it different than impeachment? And essentially, what it means is that it's a formal process by which the House of the Representatives begins an investigation of potential crimes and wrongdoing, high crimes and misdemeanors by the president. Why does that matter? It matters for a number of reasons, but one important one is, and I think Rob mentioned this earlier, that the Trump administration has really been doing its best to make documents unavailable, to make it difficult for our elected representatives to get their hands on the evidence that they have. They've been instructing witnesses not to answer questions. We recently saw, for example, Hope Hicks refused to answer 150 questions that were posed to her by members of Congress. And so, one issue that the House has had to deal with is that the Trump administration partly is stalling for time, and partly is betting on the fact that courts don't like to get involved in disputes between the elected branches of government. And so, I think the argument for opening an impeachment inquiry that Professor Tribe has put forward and others is that essentially the House of Representatives is at the maximum power to obtain documents and evidence when it is seeking evidence of wrongdoing by the president, because that's, first of all, it's the ultimate check, of course, that the legislative branch of government, the Congress, has on the president. But also, in addition to that, it is a power that is given to the House of Representatives explicitly in the Constitution. And the Constitution says that the House has the, quote, sole power and complete power of impeachment. So, really, I think if you're talking to people, whether it's your members of Congress, for example, if you have a member of Congress who's not come forward yet and decided whether or not to support an impeachment inquiry, or you're talking to other people in your community who have questions about this process, I think a good way of explaining it is that an impeachment inquiry is simply a way of finding the truth and finding facts. There's a lot of investigation, obviously, that's been done by Robert Mueller and his team, and Maya has done a good job of walking through a lot of that. But there are a lot of questions that haven't been answered yet. Obviously, some of the issues that Rob raised, like campaign finance and other issues that, of course, that Trump has been implicated in. But more importantly, even as to these issues like obstruction of justice that Maya talked about, most people didn't read the Mueller report. A CNN poll showed only 4% of Americans have read any substantial portion of the Mueller report. And a lot of people, when I talk to them, are surprised to hear that Trump tried to fire Mueller. That Trump's own attorney told him that if he tried to fire Mueller, it would be used as evidence of obstruction of justice. That he tried to stop Mueller from investigating what happened in the 2016 election, that he tried to get a witness to create a false document. Things that are just very core and explained in great detail in the Mueller report and are really undisputed, are things that people would learn if witnesses testified on live television, if they could actually see the evidence for themselves. And so that, in many ways, is what an impeachment inquiry is really about. It is about getting the evidence before the American people. That is what that process does. That is what the process did in the case of Watergate. And it certainly could have a very significant impact here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that explanation. At this point, we will go into our Q&A session of this call. Again, if you have a question at this point, please go ahead and press *3, and we will get you in the queue. But I'm going to get us started. Um, there's a couple questions I see in the queue. I'm just going to start from the top. We have Miss April Sliker. Um, she has a question about the impeachment process. I'm going to go ahead and unmute your phone. April, you can ask your question now.
Yeah, recently Representative Katie Porter said she was calling for impeachment. Can one member start this process, or it has to be the 2/3? It just seems like once it's brought more to public knowledge and to Congress's, because the president hasn't even read the Mueller report, um, they just don't know what's in it. Can one member start the inquiry, or?
The short answer is no. This is Renata Mariotti talking. The short answer is no. It actually requires a majority vote of the House Judiciary Committee. And really, what's happening right now is the Speaker Pelosi, and at least publicly, House Judiciary Chairman Nadler, although privately it appears that he supports impeachment. Right now, publicly, he has not brought this matter before the Judiciary Committee for a vote. It appears that the majority of the Judiciary Committee supports impeachment. But what's going on is that Nancy Pelosi's job is to keep her caucus united. And until at least a majority, if not more, of the caucus comes out and says that they support impeachment, the House is not going to move forward, and that's why in order for this process to move forward, more members of Congress will have to be persuaded.
Yeah, right. Just to add on to that, right now there's a big majority of Democrats in the Judiciary Committee who are in favor of starting the inquiry, and Nancy Pelosi's keeping them at bay because she hasn't gotten from her caucus enough votes that she feels she wants a guarantee that they're going to be able to go all the way, and if she wanted. And she decided she wanted to start an inquiry, she could whip those votes in a half an hour. She could whip all the votes in a half an hour. That's where we are.
Yeah, and one legal point just to make about the difference between beginning a formal inquiry, as Renato laid out, and not, is Congress can hold hearings to elicit all this information and these facts that we're talking about. As we've seen, because the Trump administration is absolutely and outrageously obstructing Congress, the way they're going to be able to fast track enforcement of their subpoenas is going to be much more legally powerful if they have initiated a formal impeachment inquiry in order to get those witnesses just to come forward and tell the Congress and the American people what they told Robert Mueller.
Yeah, and that was the third article of impeachment against Nixon, which was the executive branch's contempt of Congress. And that's what he's doing on a daily basis.
Absolutely right. And I know you brought up Nancy Pelosi just a little while ago. Katrina has a question about Speaker Pelosi. Katrina, you're on the line.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for the call tonight. Not a big deal. It's Katina. I'm in Vermont. Wanted to know if either any of you agree that Speaker Pelosi is running the political clock down due to the upcoming presidential election. I've been listening carefully, like all of you, and many people think that if the investigation is not launched in the next couple of weeks, given the timing of the election, that it probably will not happen.
My gut instinct is that it will. You have till probably the end of August, but not much longer than that. And I don't think she's running out the clock so much as she has made a calculation that it will be bad for the Democrats if they go into an impeachment inquiry. She thinks that's going to, backfire on the Democrats. And I respect her. She has a great instinct, obviously, but I think she's wrong. I think she's dead wrong.
Can I just say, Katina, in terms of running the clock down, just to put a little data in there, Congress has a recess, and I think it goes from July 26th until September 9th. So during that time, they actually won't be in Washington, D.C., so they couldn't, in effect, hold hearings. So when you think about this clock, of course there is the presidential primaries that start at the beginning of February 2020. But as today is, whatever it is, June 25th, I think, we're looking at just about exactly a month from now, Congress is going to go out for over 6 weeks. And so when you think about the timing, even if they were to start during July, they would then be a 6-week break. And so the ability to, we've been pushing really hard, and the people on this list and the people on this phone call have been pushing really hard to try and get the show on the road, because the real impact of this that Rob's referring to politically is showing on TV what we saw in our focus groups, which is people don't have the information, they didn't read the Mueller report, and when they see the information, it's incredibly powerful. So when you think about the timing of this, if we get into 2020, you are now trying to remove not just the President of the United States, but you're trying to remove the Republican candidate for President of the United States during an incredibly emotional and competitive campaign. And you're now in a place where what we keep saying is, this is about what Rob Reiner said. This is about patriotism. This is about preserving the rule of law. This is about setting a precedent that the president is not above the law and is not a king. This is about protecting us from tyranny. You're now in and that it's not a partisan fight, it's a patriotic fight. By the time you get into 2020, I believe it's a straightforwardly partisan fight. You're really trying to do something that would be incredibly aggressive and would be perceived with amazing emotion, not just by elected Republicans, but by Republican voters. So that when you talk about running out the clock, that clock is a lot closer to the end than you would think if you just said, this is the president's term in office. And so that's why we've pushed so hard, and that's why this, delaying, intransigence, delaying has been so expensive, because at some point you get to a place where there's no good option anymore, where you've basically not only failed to uphold the Constitution, but you've given Mr. Trump the ability to make the following statement. The Democrats hate my guts, and they couldn't find a single thing wrong, and that's why they didn't even try to impeach me, because I'm absolutely innocent. And so that's where we've come to. And if you put that 6 weeks in there, we're a lot closer to that problem than I think a lot of people understand.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. I think we have time for one last question. And I see there's an inbound caller who has a question. His name is Jay Brenman. Jay, I'm going to
Yes, I'm here.
you here.
Hey,
You can ask
yes,
your
I'm here.
question.
Hey, thank you very much. I met with my representative at an event about a week ago in a very safe district, and we were trying to convince him to support impeachment. And we said, well, what's the one thing that'll get you to support it? And he said if Trump had a court order for his tax returns and ignored the court order for the tax returns. So that's part of my question, but I really think you guys need to strategically primary Richard Neal and Jerry Nadler, because Jerry Nadler could basically go rogue and do whatever he wants. So that's sort of my question, is about what's going on with Richard Neal and these tax returns that are also apparently available from New York State. And I really do think you're basically primarying and raising a lot of money to primary those two guys would get Nancy's attention better than anything else you could do.
So I would just say as to Jerry Nadler, he supports impeachment behind the scenes and has been doing whatever he could, I think, to try to move that argument forward. So I think that would be counterproductive. As to Mr. Neal, I disagree with his strategy, and others can talk if they have more inside information. A number of members of Congress have expressed to me their concern as well, that he's pursuing the wrong path for tax returns. I will note that that litigation is ongoing, and one argument that his attorneys are using is that there isn't an impeachment inquiry open, and that the Democrats are not citing impeachment as a reason to obtain the returns, and that has a potential to hurt their case in doing so.
Look, just so you guys know, one of the things we have done is we have gone, and the people on this list have acted very powerfully with both Richard Neal and with Jerry Nadler. We have over 25 or 30,000 people in both of those districts. We have had all kinds of, I think we had 92,000 phone calls at one point to Richard Neal's office. We have done an amazing amount. We've had a lot of on the ground activity. We've had billboards. We have gone door to door in both of those extremely Democratic districts. We have done the people on this list and the grassroots part of this team have done amazing work to bring that true. And it is true that New York State passed that law just so we could get the tax returns. And, the issue in all this stuff is going to be that I think people are very concerned about being primaried and primarying them. In effect, if you believe I'm right that in 2020, that the idea of running an impeachment during 2020 would be, it's something that we were never trying to accomplish. You'd be primarying people after it had been taken off the table, just to be clear. So in terms of impeachment, it might be a good thing to do for the future in some people's minds, but it probably wouldn't result in an actual impeachment and removal.
And thank you, everybody, for your questions. There are a ton in here, but we want to make sure that we start and end on time. At this point, I just want to thank all of our guest speakers for your knowledge and sharing it with us. And for everyone else, I just want to share a little bit more information and get you to do one thing for me. Because one of the most important things that we can do at this point, just like tonight, is spark the conversation in our communities about what the impeachment process means so that we can dispel the misconceptions, we can communicate effectively with our elected officials, and we can launch into action. Keyword there is action. Teach-ins have a long history as a powerful organizing tool. When education goes hand in hand with agitation and with demanding justice, we are unstoppable, and we've seen that time and time again. That's why we're doing these impeach-ins and teach-ins all across the country to educate ourselves about what the impeachment process means for our democracy, for our country, and for our communities, and how best to take action right now. Again, keyword action. So you don't have to have a big house or have a bunch of friends who are impeachment minded in order to host an impeach-in. You don't even have to be a constitutional scholar or a contributor on news. It doesn't matter if you live in a red state like I do or a blue state like Tom does. All that's needed is for you to have a willingness to do something and start the conversation about defending our democracy right now. So here's the thing. You can host an impeach-in at a coffee shop or at a library, at your faith institution or in the park. And we've had a lot of in the park impeach-ins. You can even do it at home in your own living room. But once you decide on a time and place, you can register it on our event website and even decide whether you want to make your impeach-in event public or private. Now, I just want to share this with you. If you decide to make it public, others will be able to find your event on our website and join you if they like to. Even we'll help drive some more supporters to your event if they're looking for one in your area. Now, if you want to make it private, only the people that you invite personally will be able to see your event. Also, a big crowd is great, but just having a conversation with five of your friends and neighbors is just as impactful because all of these conversations and actions they add up. So here's what you can do. After you register your event online, you can we'll help you with the host training. We'll give you an action kit and an agenda to help you run your impeachment smoothly. So If you're ready to take the next step and join us in hosting an impeach-in and helping us impeach this very criminal president, you can sign up now by pressing the number one on your phone. If you want to do this, just press number one right now. If this is something that you're not interested in, you can press two. And if you're just not sure yet, press three. Also, you can go online to dot needtoimpeach.com/gather. That's GATHER. So dot needtoimpeach.com/gather. And you can sign up there to host your own impeach-in. Now, I just want to share this quick little story of some of my volunteers here in South Carolina, down in the great city of Georgetown, South Carolina. Um, Deb Smith and Marilyn Hemingway decided that they wanted to do a impeach-in, and they don't have a huge house and a large group of progressives down there, so they decided to do it in a park, and hoping that 10 to 15 people would show up. When they put their event online and they started reaching out, lo and behold, they had nearly 40 people show up to their event. It was a great time. They were playing music and sharing stories. There were folks from the movement in the 60s who came out, and it was a huge success. But I've also been part of some that I've hosted myself where only 5 people have showed up, and we had it just as an impactful conversation that led to those other 5 people visiting their member of Congress and even uh, in, inviting others to host impeachments. Just like I said earlier, every little bit counts. So we just want you to help us, join us, no matter if you're in a red state or a blue state. It doesn't matter. We could all use a little help to get educated about the process and about what's in the Mueller report. So again, if you're interested in doing so, press one. If you're not interested, press two. And if you're just not sure and might just need a little more information, press three. I thank all of you for joining us tonight. We had nearly 2,000 people on this call tonight. Thank you, Tom, for your leadership. Thank you,
Hey, Brandon,
everyone.
can I say a couple
Go ahead.
words at the end? I just want to make sure
Please.
before we
No, you
cut
have
out.
the floor. You have the
And
floor right
it's
now.
about tonight too. Look, about 18 months ago, we thought there was a crisis in democracy and that it was a threat that went to the very heart of our system. And actually, what we've seen since is not only is that true, but unless we can make a change, we'll actually see the system unable to do what you would think of as the most important but simplest task, which would be to get rid of a criminal in the White House. And what we've tried to do, and the reason that I think nights like tonight and the entire effort has been so significant from my point of view, is that the attempt to remedy a crisis in democracy with more direct democracy, with an actual petition showing the numbers of people, by direct intervention by citizens in terms of emailing, calling, writing their congresspeople and actually meeting with them. And that in fact, as we've seen the federal government in Washington, D.C., unable to deal with some of our most basic problems, we've been trying as a group, including tonight, to organize around the idea that if the people get our way, then in fact we can solve those basic problems and go back to a functioning democracy. So as we go forward, be aware that's always been the aim of Need to Impeach, that it's always been not only a substantive attempt, but a symbolic attempt to make the point that the fancy pants in Washington, D.C., who think they run everything, get their power from the people. And that the morality and the power in this country rest with the people across 50 states, across 2 major political parties, across every age group, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation. That's been the point of this. That will be the point of this. And that is the way that you should think about it, that we're actually trying to restore our democracy through more democracy. Sorry, Brandon, I really felt I had to say that.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Again, you can press one if you want to do it. Host a impeach-in, press three if you're unsure, and two if you're not interested at this time. Thank you again, and everyone have a great night.